CD2. Jordan didn't hesitate. She took the razor blade from me as I lay, face down on the floor in her bedroom. She slashed a hole in the back of my black t-shirt, then carved the word fuck in my flesh. I had been looking at a lot of tribal books when the idea came to me. This was a rite of passage for the warrior. Jordan washed the blood away and put an old t-shirt on my body decoration to soak up the blood. Then she put the kettle on. With my leather jacket slung over a shoulder, I decided to go for a walk down the King's Road, with the fresh air stinging my wound and the shock of the people I passed increasing my mood of euphoria. A few hundred yards down the road, a very bubbly character ran up to me. He had short cropped black hair, piercing eyes and a cut-glass accent. He said he was a director and would I like to be in his film entitled Jubilee, all the while beaming a cheeky smile at me. This became bigger when I told him that I had a band and that he should talk to Jordan too. He told me that he had already cast Jordan in the leading role. A couple of hours later, she telephoned me at my freshly painted, black of course, room in Redcliffe Gardens. Derek said he'd met this great-looking kid walking along the street who was perfect for the part of the pop star in the film. He said you had what he was looking for, the way you moved, the attitude in your face. Jarman hadn't realised that fuck was written in blood until Jordan told him. He later wrote a scene into the film in which one of the characters uses a razor to write fuck into another's back. Would I like to be in the film? Of course I would. Derek Jarman always claimed that he was inspired to make Jubilee after seeing Jordan walking towards him dressed in a miniskirt covered in white GB car stickers, fishnet stockings, and with her hair in a strawberry-coloured beehive. His reaction was highly unusual at the time, though. The major effect of punk in England in the mid-1970s was one of shock and most definitely not of admiration. Britain was a very different place to the one that we know now. For the most part, it seemed that the great British public was racist. Sexism was also common, and, like racism, apparently acceptable. The Sun had carried topless page 3 girls since 1969, and television's comedy shows like On the Bus's Love Thy Neighbour and The Benny Hill Show joked about black people and sex and featured semi-naked girls for no good reason other than because they could. For a generation of people who had grown up with mates who were not white and with women who didn't want to be housewives, Britain was a dull place to live. Punk was the way we thought that we could change things. The music was deliberately loud and simple in direct contrast to the overproduced rubbish coming out from the mega-rich rock stars of the day. Because everyone wore flared trousers, punks wore straight-leg trousers. Because men still wore ties, punks wore ties, but studded them with safety pins and wore them more like a noose. Because men and women wore their hair neat, punks wore theirs messy and brightly coloured. Because sex was still an activity that took place in private, punks acted provocatively and perversely. Female punks made their sexuality so obvious that they ceased to be alluring to straight men. Punk was incredibly arousing. Having my own place to live made me feel free for the first time in my life. I became part of the punk scene that was based around the Pistols, Malcolm McLaren and sex in the King's Road, Chelsea. A couple of miles away, there was another punk gang centred around Ladbroke Grove and the Clash. Their scene was more political than the King's Road scene, and the only real link between the two was Johnny Rotten, who was the only pistol interested in changing the world, not just selling t-shirts. Although his dress sense did cause quite a stir, of course. When Rotten started wearing teddy boy draped jackets and styling his hair in a quiff in 1977, he soon had what was left of a dad's army of Teds after his blood. The tabloids made as much of the Teds versus Punks battles on the King's Road that summer as they had of the Mods versus Rockers battles on the beach in Brighton in 1964. But it wasn't anywhere near as bad. One sunny day I found myself cornered by 6 Teds as I came out of Sloane Square tube station. I was dressed in all black leather, with my face white, one eye covered in black coal and split-toed Chinese wedge slippers on my feet. "What are you then?" snarled one of them. My pulse raced and so did my brain. "I'm a Gene Vincent fan, mate," I stammered. 6 Neanderthal brains topped by greasy quiffs churned. "What do you mean?" asked another. "Well, he wore all leather at the time, didn't he?" I asked back. Bebop-A-Lula, Wildcat, Cruisin'. I ran through as many Gene Vincent song titles as I could. It worked. They let me go without breaking any of my limbs. Still, a tabloid frenzy fueled an anger towards punks from people who didn't understand what we were about and felt threatened by their ignorance. They didn't get the irony of their trying to hurt people who were clearly hurting themselves far more effectively than a boot or fist ever could. Self-mutilation was common among punks, whether it was pushing a safety pin through an earlobe or lip, carving words into our bodies, or pogoing into each other. Punks damaged themselves constantly. The common adoption of a false name by punks was not simply to be colourful, it was a statement of rejection of our identity. It's not completely surprising to find that some of the original punks later told of having been abused or of having had a miserable childhood. Punk was the first youth movement in which women played as big a part as men. For the first time, bands had female members who were not there solely as a sex object. Patti Smith was the first poet of punk, an almost asexual skinny New Yorker full of no-shit attitude. X-Ray Spex had the wonderful Polystyrene as lead singer, and she'd often appear on stage with rollers in her hair, braces on her teeth, and a 1950s wool two-piece from Oxfam worn over leggings and men's shoes. The Slits were an all-female band who were confrontational and unsexy in any conventional way, but powerfully sexual in performance. And of course there was Jordan. On May the 5th, 1977, Adam and the Ants made our world premiere in Eve's room at her parents' place. I'd asked a few friends along to give us feedback, among them Polystyrene. We were to play a showcase for the manager of Polly's band, Falcon Stewart, and one for Andy Chesowski, former manager of the Roxy Club. Things didn't go brilliantly at either though. Neither Andy nor Falcon were going to become manager of Adam and the Ants, but I had another idea. Jordan. We were sitting in the back room of Sex, now renamed Seditionaries, drinking tea. Have you ever thought of becoming a manager? What, of a shop like this? No, of a band. What do you mean a band? Us, Adam and the Ants. Oh, I dunno, are you any good? Come and find out. We're playing at the Man in the Moon tonight. The audience wasn't huge, probably about 40 people. We started with Jordan, Send a Letter To, and I really went for it. I was wearing a black leather mask with a zipped mouth and leather pants over the top of black trousers. I leapt around as usual and crawled through the audience, grabbing people's ankles. Then the equipment blew up. Jordan loved the performance and agreed to become the manager that night. A week later we supported a band called Desolation Angels at my old college, Hornsey. Unusually they were led by their drummer, Dave Barb. He's great, Jordan says as they finished their set. We should nick him. We did, and Dave became an Ant for the next 2 years. By this time, Sid Vicious had replaced Glenn Matlock as bassist in the Sex Pistols. I knew him through my irregular contact with Rotten and never really believed all the stories of the havoc that Sid is supposed to have wreaked. Marco Pironi, the guitarist with the very first lineup of Susie and the Banshees for which Sid played drums, was a friend of his in the early days, and he later told me that Sid would visit him at Marco's parents' place in Harrow and bring an action man with him to play with. He was a very immature 18-year-old. I did see him throw a couple of bottles into the audience at the Vortex Club in Soho, but outside of that he seemed like any other well-turned-out punk rocker. That was until he met Nancy Spungen. Nancy was a junkie groupie who was as dumb as Sid was immature. Once she'd got her hooks into Sid, who had little experience of women, the pair of them became inseparable. They would turn up at a couple of places that I regularly visited at the time, particularly a brothel at Buckingham Gate run by Linda. Linda was gay, a dominatrix, and a true punk. Johnny Rotten was among many punks often to be found of an evening reclining on her sofa, which is why Sid and Nancy would appear at the door looking like ghosts and desperate for another fix, begging for money. You knew Nancy was coming before you saw her, because she smelled so badly, as if she'd pissed herself en route. At that time I would sometimes earn cash by painting people's flats, often also sleeping there while doing the job. One night after painting Linda's kitchen a brilliant white, I took off my clothes and went to sleep in a sleeping bag. Some time later I felt a whack on my cheek. I woke up to see Sid's face looking down at me. "You've been talking about me, haven't you, Adam?" Before I could answer, he threw several punches to my face and finished off with one in the groin. Then he was gone. I got dressed and rushed out to catch him, but Sid was well gone. I was unhurt but furious. The next day I began a search for him with a hammer tucked up the sleeve of my leather jacket. After a couple of hours visiting the usual cafes and rehearsal rooms where Sid might be found but without any luck, I went to St John's Wood to seek advice from an old school chum, Stephen Sophocles. He was a black belt in karate and had a real air of serenity and presence. He sat patiently as I blurted out my tale of woe before stopping me mid-sentence. "So, how badly are you hurt?" "Well, he didn't really hurt me." Stephen shrugged. "Then why lower yourself to his level?" My concealed hammer felt a lot heavier suddenly and we both started to laugh. "He has to look over his shoulder now, doesn't he?" Stephen pointed out. That night, backstage at the Marquee Club, there they were leaning against a graffiti-covered wall, Mr. and Mrs. Stink. I very carefully wrapped a small chain from around my waist, around my fist. Then I walked up to Sid, muttered, "So here you are, Sidney, I've been looking for you," and punched the wall to the right side of his head. He quickly upped and moved off, giving a silent wave and exiting stage left. I slept very well that night. Of course I wanted to know why the whole thing had started though. I had an idea that it was something to do with the Pistols' Jubilee cruise on the Thames. I had been on board. The Pistols played 2 or 3 songs and were truly awful, but by far the worst was Sid on bass. He couldn't play at all. I mentioned this to someone, I can't remember who, saying I'd be only too happy to give him a few lessons. Sid must have heard from this mystery person and decided to pay me a visit. 3 days after the boat trip I began to keep a diary. It was not an ordinary diary though. By that I mean that it was not a book of nice clean white pages. No, it was actually a paperback edition of William Burroughs' The Naked Lunch. At the top of the inside cover I wrote 9th of the 6th, 77, 3:10 p.m. Have just bought this book, hope it's good. Needless to say that I didn't finish Naked Lunch and instead wrote over the printed pages of the book in black ink. I continued to keep a diary for the next 20 years though, all of which were written on proper, plain page diaries. When I started writing them, if I was not playing music I was writing songs. If I was not doing that I was either painting walls during the day or going to gigs at night. And then there was sex. I now understand that sex and music were helping me to contain my then undiagnosed bipolar illness. My manic phases were spent having sex or making music. My depressive phases were spent crying, writing in my diary, and then to raise myself out of them, having sex. Sex was my panacea. Pure sex was my salvation. Pure sex was usually at its most enjoyable when the relationship between us was new. But there were several women in my life with whom every time we made love it was pure sex. At least for a while. The making of Jubilee in the summer of 1977 was as chaotic as the finished film looks. Derek Jarman wanted it to be a true reflection of the self-inflicted pain and mayhem of the punk scene, and went to any lengths in order to ensure that he got realistic scenes. Although, since the film had Queen Elizabeth I travelling through time to a futuristic London and walking along streets filled with burning rubbish and marauding girl biker gangs, realism was subjective. Buckingham Palace was a recording studio, and England run by a music business mogul who selects my character as a future star. It didn't make much sense, but it was an art film, so it didn't matter. The Ants recorded our very first single, Plastic Surgery, for Jubilee. However, because of the artiness of the film, I was derided as not being a true punk by various music papers when they came to review it. But I have to say that Derek Jarman inspired his actors to go for it under any circumstances. He was a kind of gay film terrorist, and that he never stopped working right up until his death from AIDS was a testament to his courage. The last time I saw him, he was sitting in Maison Bertrot in Soho, surrounded by young film people. He looked completely happy. A couple of Jubilee's producers, Howard Malin and James Whaley, had started a company that they called Megalovision and intended to create a media management business. Just as filming was winding up, I decided to ask Malin if he'd like to be my business manager and keep Jordan as my personal manager. I do not want to be sidetracked nor concerned with anything other than the ants and ant music, I wrote in my diary. Everybody has to realise that I am not a dreamer. There are no risks involved at all. The only thing that can stop me is my death. Mandy was sweet 16, but she had a lot of front. She and a friend approached me at the 100 Club asking if they might come and visit me sometime. I gave them an address in Chelsea and said to call by next week. I was staying there on and off while I painted it. When Amanda, though I prefer Mandy, Donahoe came to visit me, it was difficult to believe that she was only 16. She was beautiful, with black hair and a perfectly formed woman's body. She was also very intelligent and sharp-tongued with a wicked sense of humour. After an hour of chatting and laughing about all and everything, I was made speechless by her suddenly kissing me and biting my lip. I had no intention of going any further until we knew each other better. This was the beginning of a beautiful affair. John Peel was the DJ for the coolest radio show in the UK, with the power to break a new band with one play of an independently recorded single. Despite having been a leading figure in the hippie movement of the 1960s, Peel had retained a level of street credibility that none of his colleagues at Radio 1 could ever hope to have. Peel had managed this by being totally unpretentious and committed to playing music that he liked. He had been a champion of Mark Bolan when T-Rex was still known as Tyrannosaurus Rex, for example. He also championed David Bowie before he became famous. Likewise, he'd played Roxy Music on his show when mainstream radio wouldn't touch them. Peel's producer, John Waters, knew Jordan very well, which is how, after a gig at the Royal College of Art, we got a date to record Deutsche Girls, Lou, It Doesn't Matter and Puerto Rican for Peel. We were playing regularly and to enthusiastic crowds, yet the music press continued to make snide remarks about the ants. In the NME, they sulkily wrote, "Unfortunately, this lot looked like being the next big punk thing." A week or so later, someone else at the NME wrote, in reference to another band altogether, "Well, if Adam Ant can get mileage out of cheap S&M references, there's hope for this awful group too." Then Jubilee opened and the music press hated the film and used it as another weapon with which to bash me in print. I took my mum and Nan to the premiere though, and despite people hissing and booing, they thought that it, and especially I of course, was good. I felt embarrassed by the film, to be honest. It seemed like a complete mess on first viewing. Today I think it's an amazing achievement and a testament to Derek Jarman's persistence and ingenuity. After the screening I cringed when Mum and Nan started calling me a star, because I know I wasn't. Not yet. Toward the end of March 1978, Malin told me that an independent record company named EG, who had released the Jubilee soundtrack album, had said yes to signing the Ants, but only on various conditions. They were, 1, that I change and lose my heavy image, which meant no more rapist mask and S&M outfits. 2, think of the deal as a long-term option. I had previously said only 2 singles in an album. 3, think a la Adamant and not Adam and the Ants, as they put it, which meant to be a solo act, not frontman for a band. And 4, come up with some new songs. At the time, desperate for action, I felt that none of their conditions were any kind of a problem. However, for their own reasons, after a week of my planning my debut LP in detail, EG declined the chance to sign me. I felt as if the wind had been completely taken out of my sails. We had been booked to play the Roundhouse in Camden the day after I got the news, and despite not really wanting to, the show had to go on. So I put on my best Westwood kilt, but felt so down that I couldn't leap around or into the audience as I usually would. It felt like the death of something for me, and it was in a way. It was the death of the Ants Mark I because I'd recently sacked various members in preparation for the EG deal. It was also the death of punk. After the show, feeling down and directionless, I wrote in my diary, "I remember my illness. I am frightened. I hit myself on the jaw to remind myself. I want to cry but can't. I have talent. I have a right to portray my art in my way. I will win. Even at this dire moment when I have £1.14p to my name, I believe that." As I often did when things went wrong, I craved sex almost constantly and sometimes would make love with different women on the same day. Mandy was in Germany for 5 weeks that summer and I missed her badly. Even when she returned, though, my desire was not contained solely by her. Unfortunately, Mandy thought that I was her boyfriend and she was my girlfriend, and that naturally meant that we were to be faithful to one another. In my mind I was, but in the flesh I had to have sex with new, different women whenever I could. The sex kept me sane. Howard Mayling continued working on getting the Ants a record deal, and managed to get interest in the Ants from Mike Smith at Decca. With no one else in the frame, we signed with them initially for 2 singles in 1978. I thought things were on the up, and 2 days after the signing we played consecutive nights at West Hampstead's Moonlight Club. I was on a high. The audience took to new songs as if they'd known them for ages. But the next day I got a letter from Megalovision. At the top, scrawled in black felt pen, were the words, "Adamant School Report." It began, "From the desk of JPW and HDM, ex-managers." It went on to say that they were embarrassed to be at the previous night's gig. They couldn't see how I could ever hope to play to the kind of audiences that went to see what they called proper rock bands like Fleetwood Mac, for instance. I was only appealing to 14-year-olds, they said, and claimed that they'd overheard fans leaving the gig slagging me off. The letter was signed, in the same black felt pen, "Your headmaster," and added to it in blue biro with the words, "Most of your teachers hope you'll do better next term." After I'd got over my shock, I felt relief. It was over with Megalovision. Great. It was a new beginning, although it proved to be a false dawn. Decca released only 1 single, Young Parisians, with Lady on the B-side, in August 1978, before letting us go because the company boss just didn't understand us. We then signed with an independent label named Do It, who released Xerox with Whipping My Valise on the B-side in June 1979, our debut album Dirt Wears White Socks in August 1979, and the single Car Trouble and Kick in February 1980. That saw our contract fulfilled with Do It, which was just as well since by that time my life had changed dramatically. In October 1979, I went to a wedding reception with Jordan at the Portobello Hotel. We sat at a table with Malcolm McLaren, who, after a while, leaned across and asked me, "So Adam, what's happening with the group?" For almost 3 hours, Malcolm lectured me on the music business in a way that no one else ever had, or could. Among the various bits of rubbish that he offered up as advice, he did hit upon something. Video discs, Malcolm said, were the future of rock and roll. He had me completely hooked. We decided between us that the live show was a thing of the past and the future belonged to the artist who could make the best videos. I left the party refreshed, more determined to make things happen for Adamant, and also wondering how I could possibly get Malcolm to manage me. "Adam, I want to leave the band." The date was January the 26th, 1980. Dave Barb, my longest-serving ant, was standing before me in the rehearsal room in Camden Road, his head bowed and his voice trembling. "I've been a good soldier for 3 years," he continued, without looking at me, "and I've had enough. Your lyrics are shit and you don't work as hard as we do on getting things right. You just order us about and we don't want that anymore." I felt stunned and foolish. Malcolm McLaren was sitting in a corner, biting his fingernails. "We?" I'm beginning to realise that this was all a set-up. Dave then went on for another 10 minutes or so, telling me how terrible I was to work with. To hear him tell it, I was worse than Franco, Hitler and Mussolini put together. I was astounded. Only weeks before I'd sacked them all except Dave, and only got them back together because of Malcolm's interest in managing us. Now they were trying to sack me. "You're not having the name," I managed to half shout before turning and almost running out of the door. Halfway up the stairs I broke down and cried. Malcolm came up behind me. "Come on," he said, and put an arm around my shoulder. We walked around the corner to a cheap cafe. I felt totally humiliated. "Adam," Malcolm said, "it's not that bad. Look, just tell them that you'll come back and work democratically." "Fuck that. I eat shit for no one. Songwriting is a craft and I'll find another craftsman who works as I do." How had all this happened after only 3 weeks? 3 weeks of indoctrination and ego building by Malcolm, and the ants had ceased to be. I headed towards home in a daze, but then for some reason thought about Marco Pironi and decided to go to Harrow instead. When I reached his place, Marco wasn't at home, so I put a note through his door asking him to call me. Then I met Mandy and spent the night with her. She cried her heart out and wanted to go and throttle a lot of them. So how had it happened? By the end of the first week in December 1979, Malcolm and I had agreed to a management deal for me as a solo act. He called it an Elvis Colonel Tom Parker deal, where we got 50-50 each. I had to do as he said for a month in order to get everything right, and then we'd be ready to take on the world. Meanwhile, Matthew Ashman had agreed to rejoin the Ants, and Lee Gorman joined as the new bassist. On December the 10th, I set off on a personal appearance tour to promote Dirk. The Ants were to rehearse under the guidance of Malcolm while I was gone. On the train out of King's Cross, I wrote in my diary that Matthew is a large problem, doubt, in my mind. I feel Malcolm may even take him on and leave me to my fate. If I wasn't already a full paranoiac, I am now. I had taken to reading books on American Indians and African tribes. Malcolm kept trying to get me to read stuff about pirates. It was going to be Vivian's new look, he said. But it was the warrior mindset that intrigued me. I had a number of new songs coming together, including one set to a Burundi-style beat which I thought I might call ant music. However, I had decided that Malcolm was a bit weird by then though, because of his London Spiv act. He was always trying to get the band off with tarts, as he called them, and talking out the side of his mouth saying, "Cool boys, what about her?" as a woman walked past us. I found it funny at first, but it soon became annoying. Weirdly, it seemed as if he believed that was how managers had to behave. By then, Malcolm needed a new band because there was no more Sex Pistols. Lydon had quit. Sid Vicious was dead, having overdosed on heroin while he was on bail accused of killing Nancy Spungen. If Malcolm was ever going to take the music biz by storm again, he had to do it soon, and I thought that he would, with Adam and the Ants. A few months later, though, I realised that Malcolm was scouting for a band to back the 14-year-old Annabella Lou Wynne, and had settled on the Ants. I think he would have been perfectly happy for me to be a part of the backing band, but he must have realised that I wouldn't stand for that. Ultimately, I suppose, I have Malcolm to thank for one thing, though, since the split led me into the longest-lasting and most fruitful relationship of my adult life. Adam, it's Marco. You wanted to talk to me? Yeah. Do you want to write songs with me? Yeah, okay. Let's meet in Covent Garden. It was as simple as that. We agreed that everything would be split 50-50. I still don't know why I went to see him originally. I'd only spoken to him about 3 times before, and then it had been brief, along the lines of, "Nice trousers," or, "I've got a guitar like yours." Marco was scary when he was a punk. He was big, unapproachable and self-contained, but he was the best guitarist I'd ever seen. Like me, Marco had been left alone at home at an early age because his parents both worked. No one beat him up when he was a kid though, and he was loved by both his parents, which could be why he gave off such a sense of calm and of being in control. From the first day of making music together, I knew that we had something. We didn't necessarily like all the same music, but we both knew and agreed on what we didn't like. He was organised and methodical, and would make me decide early on how many lines were in a verse, how many times a line was repeated for a chorus. I'd ask him how things should be, and he'd say, "How do you want them to be?" Marco gave me confidence in my songwriting because I knew that he was creating a structure that worked. In the early 1970s, lots of bands had used 2 drummers to make a big beat, vaguely rock and roll kind of sound. That was what we decided to base Ant music on. Add the Burundi idea and we had a great, percussive sound that was truly ours. Because Falcon Stewart had been calling me ever since first hearing that Malcolm was managing me, I told him about the split. He agreed to work with us, without a contract, and soon, without even playing a note to anyone, we had Beggars Banquet and Polygram interested in signing us. Marco had suggested using a guy named Chris Hughes to produce our first recordings together. He also happened to be a drummer, so we asked him to join the band. Marco suggested that we also ask Terry Lee Mile, who'd been in the Models with him, to join as drummer. All we needed was a bassist. Surprisingly, I found one, living with Eve, Kevin Mooney, her new boyfriend. On the 19th of April, we recorded Kings of the Wild Frontier. I felt elated on hearing the finished track. The drums sounded like 10,000 Zulus banging their shields in the film Zulu. I couldn't wait to get the band on the road. I'd been spending increasing amounts of time with Mandy since the split with Malcolm. She was unsure about what she should do for a career, and I suggested that she become an actress. So she applied to the Central School of Speech and Drama. At times I felt that the 7-year age gap and my selfish obsession with getting ant music together was bad for her, and that she should start seeing some other people. But if I got any idea that she was seeing someone else, I'd have a jealous fit of rage. Getting back on the road was a relief and delight. The opening night of the Ants Invasion Tour 1980 at London's Electric Ballroom was a sellout. Mandy acted as wardrobe mistress, painting feathers with stripes and sewing ribbons into hair extensions for me. Everything was going well until the third date in Manchester. I had left our hotel room early with Mandy still in bed. When I came back though, she was running down the road towards the station, crying. "I hate you," she screamed. "I don't ever want to see you again." She told me that she'd found and read my diary. She felt bad not only because of what she'd read, but also because she'd read it. She was close to being hysterical, and I tried vainly to calm her down. After a couple of hours, Mandy left for London. I felt indescribably bad, and that I was not reacting like the kind of person that I wanted to be, but like the person that I had to fight every day. That was the bad Adam who had black thoughts, temper tantrums when things weren't going well for him, and forced people away from him when they tried to make him feel better. It occurred to me that perhaps by reading my diary, Mandy was looking for a reason to end things between us. Yet when it had come to it, neither of us could. Not yet, anyway. All through the tour I'd worn a 19th century British military jacket on stage. I'd hired it from Dave Whiting, who worked at Theatrical Costumiers, Berman and Nathan's in Covent Garden. It had originally been made for David Hemmings to wear while filming Charge of the Light Brigade, Dave told me. By the time we played the final date of the tour at the Empire Ballroom, there were kids in the audience who were also wearing military jackets and who had painted a single white line across their nose. It was happening. The gig was a blast, and the next day EMI offered Marco and me £22,000 for the rights to our song publishing. On the 25th of July, 1980, Adam and the Ants was signed to CBS. The single of Kings of the Wild Frontier hit the streets. The papers unanimously slagged it. Feeling like shit after being described as an old man by McLaren in an NME interview, I took a deep breath, had a haircut and told myself, I will win. So I planned the next single release. A newspaper had given me the idea for Doggy Dog when I'd read the line as reportedly having been used by Margaret Thatcher. It was a powerful image and one that appealed to me in my then mood of anger at McLaren. CBS liked the song enough to release it as a single. It went into the charts at number 50 and then went up to number 37. We had broken the top 40 for the first time. You fucking prick, call yourself a punk? Fucking stupid clothes and puffy makeup. You're shit. 4 young guys wearing donkey jackets, Dr. Martens and beanie hats were giving me and the Ants a verbal lashing as we walked through the BBC foyer in Shepherd's Bush. Oi darling, want a real fuck? One of the idiots shouted at Mandy. That was a mistake. She turned, flashed them a V sign and said, You couldn't handle it. Adam's more of a man than you'll ever be, dickhead. I steered her in front of me and down the staircase. I didn't really want to get into a fight at our first ever Top of the Pops performance. I felt a kick in the small of my back and fell down the stairs. Get him! I looked up as a spotty-faced moron leaned over me. Mandy had whacked him full on the nose. The tiny corridor in which I was sprawled suddenly filled with big men in uniforms. The BBC security guards had arrived at last. The day after the attack, the Daily Mirror ran a headline along the lines of Punk stars in Top of the Pops riot, and went on to misreport the whole affair. That night, though, there was probably a large proportion of the Top of the Pops audience waiting to see Adam and the Ants than there would have been if nothing had happened. Overnight, we became famous. Doggy Dog shot up the charts and made number 4. A couple of weeks later, Kings of the Wild Frontier, the album, was released, and CBS agreed that there should be another single from it, and that this time there should be a proper promo video to accompany it. I chose Ant Music. For the video, we hired my old haunt, the Tiny Sombrero Club in Kensington, and filmed us performing the song to a crowd who are reluctant at first to dance, but eventually get completely into the song and surround us on the underlit dance floor. It wasn't exactly Lawrence of Arabia, but it did help Ant Music make the number 2 position in the charts, only missing number 1 because Imagine by John Lennon had been re-released. Lennon had just been murdered. We were on tour in Edinburgh when we heard that the Kings album had gone into the chart at number 4. Marco and I literally danced around the room chanting, "Number 4! After 3 years of slog, I had made it. I wanted to go straight back into the studio and make another album and to set up another tour. I instinctively knew that keeping myself busy meant keeping the depression that had killed Stuart Goddard at bay. The tour turned out to be a mix of magic and mayhem. Because of the success of Dog and now Kings and Ant Music, at several venues, hundreds of people turned up who couldn't get in. In Sheffield, fans staged a mini riot outside and wrecked cars, while in Hull they set fire to the doors that were closed to them. There were hundreds of fans screaming at me as I ran into the back doors of all the places we played. Our hotels were surrounded, our van followed by scores of cars. It all felt like I'd walked into the Beatles film A Hard Day's Night. The final night of the tour at the Lyceum was a cross between a victory rally and a party. Unknown to me, CBS had invited Les and Doreen, the first time they had seen me perform live. Apparently, when we began and the crowd erupted with their usual pogoing frenzy, Les's jaw dropped and he sat, stunned, for the rest of the performance. I had a great time. There were more people wearing the white stripe on their faces, lots with feathers in their hair, and nearly all of them singing along with all the songs. The hairs on the back of my neck were at permanent attention. For the first time, 2 British broadsheet newspapers reviewed the show. The Times reporter was almost Victorian in his praise, writing that there is an undeniable and oft-proven excitement to be had from the sight and sound of 2 trapped drummers resolutely performing synchronised or unison figures. The Guardian's female reporter, though, unfortunately wrote of me that he isn't very sexy. That made Mandy mad, but Marco laugh. A lot. After the BBC, a call had been made to a security firm, Artist Services, run by Don Murfitt. He was powerfully built, suited and booted, and proved to be a great combination of business and muscle. When Falcon came to me, asking for a contract as my manager, I said no. I had already decided to ask Don to manage the band. Early in 1981, the Kings album went to number 1. I felt fantastically happy and proud, but knew that we needed another single out there to keep us in the public's mind. Since we had a video made of Kings and it was the album title track, it made sense to re-release that as a single, I thought. It took some persuading by Don and me, but eventually CBS agreed. After all, they could use the existing video to help sell it. In it, I am wearing the Hemmings military jacket as in the video for Ant Music, and had worn the same outfit on top of the Pops. So there was a continuity that could only help new fans to recognise it as being by Adam and the Ants. In February, it made number 2 in the UK charts. Meanwhile, the Sun newspaper had declared that I was going to be the biggest pop star of 1981. And we had been invited to perform at the Royal Variety Show at London's Palladium Theatre in front of Princess Margaret. The week before the appearance, the band recorded the music. Only I would perform live, the band would mime. It has been said that the miming was what upset Kevin Mooney. It's also been suggested that he thought that we shouldn't play for royalty, but for me appearing on the Royal Variety Show was a high point of my career, as was meeting Princess Margaret, still in my makeup and still shaking with annoyance at Kevin's childish antics. I wasn't aware that he was swinging his bass around behind me until we'd almost finished performing Ant Music, or that he'd dropped it. I was furious at him and decided there and then that he would have to go. Luckily, Gary Tibbs, who had played with Roxy Music, was available and jumped at the chance of joining the Ants on the first Adam and the Ants US tour. In the week before leaving for America, I had met the by now master of the music video, Mike Mansfield. We had a dinner together, and I had been explaining to Don how I saw the video for the next Ant single, which was to be called Stand and Deliver. I wanted to make something that had the feel and look of a Hammer horror movie, something with costumes and a story, I told him. Mike responded positively. Why didn't I draw up the storyboards? Each scene set down on paper in a series of squares as if from the camera's point of view, and let him have them. Later that week I'd also met a new woman. Tessa Hewitt was a Sun Page 3 girl. Blonde and as curvy as a young Marilyn Monroe, she and I only had a few nights together before I flew to New York, but I hoped that we'd see more of each other when I got back. MTV had been playing the Kings and Ant music videos, and so we had a level of fame in New York. It was enough to have attracted the attention of an American Indian organisation, and they had taken objection to my wearing a white stripe across my face because they said that it was war paint. I asked to meet with them. 10 American Indian chiefs put their case to me, claiming that I was exploiting their heritage without knowing anything about it. Because I had read so much about their people, I managed to convince them that I knew a lot about the history of the North American Indian, and that I wore the stripe as a tribute to their spirit. I also promised that after they'd seen me perform, if they insisted that I no longer wear the stripe, then I wouldn't. This was a risky thing to have said. Luckily, though, they came to our American debut in Boston and loved it. I could keep my stripe. We worked our way across America from the east to the west for a month. In the process, I discovered that Marco hates being on the road and that I loved certain parts of America. Then we had to go back to England and create the video for our next single, Stand and Deliver. Bring, bring. The telephone cut sharply through my sleep. I fumbled for the receiver. Hello? A soft, high-pitched voice echoed down the line. Is that Adam Ant? The voice had an American accent, sounding vaguely familiar, almost as if it was... Terry, I said, stop pissing about, it's 4 a.m. It's not Terry, said the soft voice. It's Michael. Is that Adam Ant? Very funny, Terry, now fuck off. I slammed the phone down, cursing my drummer. A few minutes later the telephone rang again. Hello, I barked. Hi, no, really, it is me, Michael Jackson, said the funny voice. And I just want to ask you... Bang! Again the phone went down. Again the telephone rang. I grabbed the receiver. Terry, that's it! Stop it! Hi, is that Adam Ant? This time the voice was deep, slow, sonorous. It didn't sound anything like Terry. Oh, I stammered. Yes, this is Adam Ant. Who are you? I'm Quincy Jones, calling from LA. Sorry we probably woke you, but I'm here with Michael Jackson and he'd like to speak to you. Is that okay? Fuck me, I thought. Yeah, sure, put him on. A pause and then, Hi Adam, it's Michael. Sorry if we woke you, but I just saw your video on TV for Kings of the Wild Frontier. It's great. How did you get the tom-tom sound? Oh, thanks. Well, we used 2 drum kits and then add loads of other percussion. That's great, Adam, Michael interrupted. I really like your jacket. That one with the gold on the front. Can you tell me where you got it? Huh? My jacket? Berman and Nathan's. They supply costumes for movies. It had been worn by David Hemmings. Oh, the guy from Blow Up? Yeah, but this was for Charge of the Light Brigade. I rent it from them for about £30 a month. You rent it? Wow, that's great. Thanks for the information. Let's meet up next time you're in America, huh? Bye. That was Michael Jackson, I thought, calling me. I called Marco. Marco, it's Adam. Were you asleep? No, just running through a few of the songs. What's up? I just had a call from Michael Jackson. What did he want? He wanted to know where I got my jacket from. Ha! Marco snorted. Didn't want to guest on the new LP then. Oh, I didn't ask him. Maybe I should call him back. Adam? No. Go back to sleep. I'll see you tomorrow. We'd gone almost straight from the plane to the video shoot for Stand and Deliver. I had sent Mike Mansfield my storyboard drawings from America and he'd put everything in place. I wore a black tricorn hat, black cape, mask and a big white shirt over breeches. Mike had hired a stagecoach and I had done my own stunts. The leaping through a sugar glass window had been the riskiest and I'd cut my head a bit, but the shoot had been great fun and the result, Mike had told me, was looking great. Stand and Deliver went straight into the charts at number 1. The video was played on every kids' TV show in the UK. The gallows ending caused a bit of controversy though, when the BBC, despite having already shown it, decided to ban it. I am helped to escape the noose by my band in the video, but the sight of the rope apparently upset some people. The humour of the video brought Adam and the Ants to more people in the UK and Europe than any tour ever could, and in early June, Don and I made a 3-day trip to settle our US publishing deal. The headlines in The Sun that greeted my return to the UK were not happy reading. Tessa Hewitt, being a page 3 girl, was considered the property of the newspaper, so they ran a story about Adam's new love. The attention that the tabloids were paying me was increasing. Don suggested that I take a room on permanent hire at a London hotel. I had decided that the Montcalm in Cumberland Place would be my bolt hole. Only my closest friends knew that I was there, which meant, of course, that Mandy knew where I would be the morning that I arrived from New York to the Sun headlines. Her telephone call ran along the lines of, "You bastard, who is this tart? I've had bloody reporters trying to get me to talk to them about you for 3 days now." We agreed to end the relationship, or rather tried to end it again. In the meantime, I began another relationship with a beautiful red-haired dancer named Carol Kaplan, who worked with a troupe called Shock. Although I was supposedly with Tessa, the attraction between us was too powerful to ignore. We met several times that summer of 1981, usually at the Montcalm. We enjoyed an illicit love affair, in private, with no one knowing that we were enjoying one another for several months. It was a gorgeous affair. Carol was calm, relaxing to be around, sensual and soft. I distanced myself from Tessa, physically as well as emotionally, after the Sun story, and spent most of July and August recording the Prince Charming album and dealing with the various attentions of the press. The problems of living in London made me want to buy a house in the country. I eventually found an old thatched cottage just up the road from where Don lived. The old thatch had been built in 1632 and used by Cromwell to house his cavalry during the Civil War. Looking down on open Hertfordshire countryside, it had a separate building that I was going to use as a recording studio. It would take 4 years of work before I could move into the house, which I renamed Luke's, and then I would barely have enough time to spend in it. The video for Prince Charming is the one that most people remember. It took longer than any of the others to complete and was the most expensive to make. I decided that I'd really like Diana Dawes to star in the video, and she had eventually agreed, although not until I'd wooed her with dinner at nice restaurants. She was a star and wanted to be treated like one, which was fine by me. She was very warm and funny and not at all precious. I'd decided that we'd turn the Cinderella storyline around, with me as Cinders. Diana played my fairy godmother. To prepare for the shoot, I'd researched the commedia dell'arte from which British pantomime had grown out of. I discovered that there's a lot more to the panto tradition than men dressing up as women and fake cows. With Prince Charming, I was moving closer to what I thought was my future, film. Ever since Jubilee, producers had been sending me movie scripts. Some I read, others I ignored, but the idea of acting was firmly in my mind. During my first American tour, various interviewers had asked me what ant music was about. I told them that it was our music, that it wasn't like anything else around. I didn't want to be regarded as punk or new romantic, the new term being used by the music press to lump a bunch of different bands together. I was an entertainer, a part of show business. The music press never got it though. They could understand pop stardom, but the videos they were dismissive of, because it wasn't anti-establishment in the way that they wanted. On the US tour I had stated several times that I didn't drink, smoke or do drugs, and that was an old-fashioned and pointless idea of rebellion. What I wanted to put across was that there was hope in the world and not to be discouraged, which is why Prince Charming has the chorus of "Ridicule is nothing to be scared of." It meant go out and do what you want to do, believe and you'll succeed. After all, I had, despite being rubbished by the music press. Just before the shoot in July, I had another massive argument with Mandy. I had bought a flat in Primrose Hill by this time. Mandy had a key to the place and had let herself in. Again she found and read my private diary. Again we screamed at each other. Again she stormed out of my life. 3 weeks later, though, Mandy accompanied me to the airport from where I was to fly to New York. I was so glad to have her back that I asked her to walk with me to the departure gate. I knew that it would result in another load of "The Woman in Adam's Life" headlines, but I didn't care. I wanted the world to know that Adamant and Amanda Donohoe were an item. It would certainly give Tessa the message that she'd been ignoring for the last few weeks. Of course, it would also let Carol know that she and I weren't destined to be together either. Tessa got the message okay, and she took it very badly. She made a silly attempt at ending it all while I was away, which resulted in more newspaper headlines for her and me, ones which we both could have done without. I called her when I heard about it and she was apologetic and feeling foolish. Carol, on the other hand, was completely unconcerned about Mandy and me. End of CD 2.